Lions Rock Productions.
One question that I have here, maybe the last one on my list actually, but I noticed looking through your book and looking through the articles I've read about this, the large majority of the girls that are identifying as trans men or trans boys seem to be middle to upper middle class white or Hispanic girls. And I guess one question would be, is this a way to get sort of a unique or an oppressed identity? That's something I've actually written about a lot. The idea that you don't want to be just, an unsympathetic white lord. I mean, you've seen the Dolezal case, the Krug case. I will say that's very common in academia, in my opinion. But so you're not just a well-adjusted upper middle class woman from Cleveland. You might not decide you're trans, but you are, say, pansexual and moon gender, or you are a fat rights advocate, or any of these things. I mean, you mentioned people noting their mental health diagnoses. I see this very often with friends, teenage children. I have ADD, I have OCD. You may think I'm just normal, but I'm not. I struggle every day with my disease. This kind of thing. Do you think that that's valid, or is that a little too cynical? Like, is this a way to some extent to be different? You are, polyamorous, pansexual and freaky and moon gender is a description I've seen recently as a 20-year-old college student. Like, is that a way to make yourself stand out, or is there a mental health basis for that still in many cases?
No, of course, you're exactly right. It's loneliness. It's wanting to join. It's the same thing that afflicted us all at that age and afflicts troubled young women even most acutely. It is overwhelmingly white girls who are middle and upper middle class. And it's the one thing they can choose. They can't choose to be Black. They can't choose to come from an underprivileged background. They can't choose, but they can choose to be trans. They can choose to be
Black too.
They really can't though, right? I mean, they've done it, they've tried, and they've been humiliated for it. So the one thing they can choose is to be trans. And that gets a lot of respect. And, I talk to parents where progressive parents who who thought it was good when their daughters joined the Gay Straight Alliance and were happy for them to be allies. And only to find, and these were progressive people, that the school year had become a nonstop pride parade in which everybody wore pins, and anyone who didn't wear a pin, including faculty who didn't wear a pin, were demonized. They do not want to be part of that group. They don't want to be the out group. They want to be the in group. And so they're rushing toward an identity that they hope will give them that.
Is there a trend for what these girls are experiencing? Like, is this a bunch of people with borderline personality disorder? And heaven forbid that's the case. Is it, young girls have so many problems with the anorexia and cutting and bulimia. Why are we adding another one to the list,
It's the same girls. It's just a new diagnosis. So it's the same borderline personality girls, same anorexic girls. It's the same population. They look to the culture to see what will get them sympathy for the pain that they're in. They're in real pain. And right now, one of the best things they can do to boost their status and to get them attention is by declaring a trans identity. The entire household that they're in stops. They get mom and dad's complete attention. They bring their parents to their knees. The parents will do anything to get them not to pursue hormones and surgeries. And right now they've got everybody's attention, and they get celebrated at school. It's a really, yeah.
And when that attention is pulled back in any way, they seek more of it, I'm assuming?
Well, at some point they have to prove they really are trans. That's the next step. So if you look like a girl, you're not going to get much street cred for very long. So then the question is, what drugs do you start? What procedures do you start? You don't need anything for a binder. Anybody can buy a binder at any age, even though it deforms breast tissue. It's the kind of thing that probably, should only be doctor approved. It deforms breast tissue, can lead to, rib cracking, shortness of breath. These are extremely strong compression garments that are not necessarily safe at all. They have to prove that they really are a member of the club.
If my daughter, and she's an adult now, about to graduate high school or college, if she had come to me as a 13-year-old and said, someone on the internet bought me a corset and I'm going to get into waist cinching, I would lose my damn mind. I almost swore. It would drive me crazy that someone has inserted themselves into my kid's life in a way that is, not a good thing for a young girl to do. I mean, first off, it's perverted to do that. And then via the internet, it's abusive. And God, how can that not be illegal? To buy a binder for somebody and to give it without a parent's consent, You can't take your kid roller skating, or can't take someone else's kid roller skating without letting the parent know, hey, I'm going to put your kid on shoes with wheels. How in the world can you buy someone a binder?
Right, but because this gets confused with LGBTQ issues, parents who try to say no, who are progressive, have a hard time because they really don't want to be called transphobes, and they've been LGBTQ supporters their whole lives. So they do have a moment where they're really concerned about excommunication. As soon as their daughter's in harm's way, that tends to fall by the wayside. But in the beginning, they're extremely concerned about that, and then when they do object and say, honey, this isn't doing you any good, they have friends cut them off. They are called all kinds of things online. Sometimes their children post about them. They're afraid of losing their jobs. They're extremely isolated.
In the book, you talk about some of the steps to help with parents who have this situation kind of drop in their lap. And a lot of them seem to revolve around completely change your kid's environment, get them off the internet, move was one of them, like just move. What else have you learned? Is there anything else? I mean, you've written the book. It's not that old of a book, but has anything evolved in terms of what can we do as parents? This is not in the book, by the way, like the parent book. It's in your book.
I think we need to, number one, we have to limit their social media use. And I think eliminate it. I mean, anybody under 18 should not be on social media. They shouldn't have their own, they shouldn't be posting about themselves. I got an interview a couple months ago. Someone said, oh yeah, my kids are on the internet, but I just tell them, my 14-year-old or 13-year-old's on the internet, but I just tell them, don't post anything that you wouldn't want a future employer to see. Well, how is a 13-year-old supposed to do that? And I understand what they're saying. I mean, I do, but I can't pretend I would have any idea at 13 how to go about that, right? And that's what we're asking our kids who are on social media to do. We're asking them to behave like 30-year-olds. Well, they're not prepared to do that. And really, it's doing them a tremendous amount of harm. They're constantly aware of what they're being left out of or how imperfect they think they look. It's really cruel. We need to oppose to gender ideology in the schools. There's no reason you can't show compassion for a transgender child without sowing confusion in an entire student population. And, we have to remember that parents are parents for the reason we do not have to go along with everything a child comes up about themselves. We don't have to agree. It's really, you're there for a reason. And it really is to put guardrails on a teenager's self-proclamations.
Will, anything in closing?
Yeah, I actually, one quick question there. One of the things I noticed reading through this book was that it was very apparent that at least to me, that a lot of these people that were identifying as trans or as various different genders today weren't trans in the classic sense. They didn't have gender dysphoria. I mean, that's such a rare specific condition that to me, I mean, you'd really need to talk to a psychologist, a clinician. I mean, you'd have to be diagnosed with it. So I guess that there are really two different questions I have here. You already answered part of the first one with Pete, but part one is, what would you do if your kid comes to you and starts saying some of these things and you don't think they are transgender? I mean, would you get rid of their binder? How would you react? And the second, I guess, more specific question is, what would you do if they were trans? If you had a kid that actually this got serious enough that you took them to a psychologist and they were diagnosed with this condition, they believed that they were a member of the opposite biological sex. What would you do if you thought your daughter was experiencing this as a fad? And then what would you do if you thought this was all too real for your daughter or your son?
Okay, so I'll take the second one first. So first of all, remember that if a child presents with this, it's going to start in early childhood. This will not suddenly appear at age 13 in your daughter when she hits puberty. It's something you've noticed since the time she was a young girl. And remember that the vast majority of kids, if you did nothing, would outgrow it. So there is simply no reason not to let a child have the chance of outgrowing it. Many of these kids emerge as gay adults, some do not, but there's no reason that a parent needs to go in and do anything. Second of all, a psychologist is likely to agree because there are conversion therapy bans in so many of our states in which direct them that they could lose their license if they don't agree. So taking some psychologist's word for it, if you don't have reason to believe that they're really an honest a practitioner is really not the smart thing to do. I think there are good psychologists, but unfortunately there are a lot out there who are really just activists. And the question you asked before was, Whoa, do you take away their binder if they come up with it? Well, how you react to a teenage girl who comes to you with this has to do with their age. If she's out of your house and in college, you're going to have a whole different set of, conversations, and you have a lot less power and a lot less influence. 19-year-old doesn't really care what mom thinks, usually. She may care what mom does or does not pay for, but she doesn't care what mom thinks. But a 13-year-old is a very, very different matter. And sometimes when parents call me and their daughter's wearing a binder, I'll say to them, well, would you give her cigarettes? Why don't you give her cigarettes? Because a binder is going to deform breast tissue permanently. It could cause shortness of breath, rib cracking, and parents feel that they have to go along with this because of LGBTQ. Well, what in LGBTQ says you have to let your minor child permanently deform her body?
Nothing.
Right.
Nothing sensible, for 13-year-old girls.
Right. And look, I talk to a lot of lesbians who are horrified that we're going along with this, and a lot of young women, some of whom would just become lesbians if we left them alone.
This, just very quickly for me, this actually is one of the oddest things about this to me. It's not what I lead with in my biography, but I would suppose I'm a feminist in the second wave sense. I mean, obviously women should have the same chance to be business executives or sexually satisfied or happy in marriage as men. I think this is now universally agreed on. But one of the things that I heard constantly from feminist girlfriends in college is, there's no one way to be a woman. If I want to come to the gym and play ball with you guys one day, that's fine. That doesn't make me less feminine. If I want to go on to become a lawyer, that doesn't make me less feminine. I mean, it seems that there now almost is an element of conversion therapy to this in terms of the idea that if you are an aggressive, bisexual, feminist woman with some masculine characteristics, you're a man, and that you should present as that. And also, this stretches into the idea when you get into male to female transgender persons that lesbians should be very open to sex with people who are biologically male. I mean, so you see these weird, to me, cringe-inducing pieces in the gay press, like how to pleasure the female penis as a lesbian. And I mean, I can just imagine this coming from the right, like what you need is a big, you need guys in your life. And that would be viewed as, quite rightly, as disgusting, disturbing. But if people that are biologically male are presenting now as women, the idea is that you're a lesbian much like any other. At any rate, I guess the question is, what's the feminist take on that? I mean, I would assume you might well be a feminist in the same way I am. How does it, are people now accepting on a large scale that aggressive masculine women are men, or that those characteristics make you a man rather than a tomboy?
The thing to know here is that biological men are driving the activist agenda, and they are saying what we can, they are redefining women, and they're saying what we can and cannot talk about when it comes to young women's health. Wow. It's really an incredible power grab by them. And the way that they treat lesbians is really an untold story in our time. Lesbians are being constantly harassed. They are a sexual minority that is allowed to just be constantly harassed, so much so that, and I write about this in the book, that they have largely gone underground with their meetings. They need vetting processes in order to have social clubs, because they get constantly harassed by trans activists. The way women are being treated in society at large today is horrifying, frankly. And, this activist group of largely biological male is running the show, and they're determining who women are and how they are to be treated and what women are supposed to find acceptable. And it really is past time we stopped going along with this.